Hello guys, welcome to another PK12 Productions. Today we're looking at the Nexus versus the iPad Mini. So the Nexus 7 on the right and obviously the iPad Mini on the left. So we're looking at hardware first up. Interesting enough, we have the Nexus 7 which has the Tegra 3 processor. It has a quad-core Tegra 3 processor, and also we have Jelly Bean 4.2, and obviously the iPad has iOS running the A5 processor. So let's take a look at the form factor here. So we're looking at a really thin form factor here for the iPad Mini, as you can see right there. If we turn it around, you see the Lightning connector, proprietary dock connector. And if we look at the Nexus here, it's a little bit smaller for screen. It's got the micro USB on the side there. It's thicker in comparison to the iPad Mini, but it does the job regardless. In form factor, it's very comfortable to hold because of its smaller, thinner form factor as well. So which to go for? You've got the iPad Mini and you've got the Nexus 7. Which one is best to look at? Well, we're going to look at all what we need to look at here. So let's take a look at the overall size between the two. So holding them both in the hand, as you can see, it's quite easy to hold the Nexus 7 in the hand. It's not so bad with the iPad Mini, but it's a lot easier. If we look at rotation, it's actually still faster on the iPad to rotate, but in that case, that is how iOS has always been. But it's still the best version of Android, and it does do a very good job at rotation. So it is not bad at all. It's just something that you will notice if you actually were used an iOS product for a long time. Weight, they feel pretty much the same. The iPad Mini probably is a little bit lighter in terms, but it's nothing you would actually notice if that's a big factor. Right, for the first round on hardware, I would have to give it to the Nexus 7. And here are the scores. iPad Mini gets a 4 and the Nexus 7 gets a 5. Now let's take a look at iOS features. So notification center on the left, and we have obviously notifications for Jelly Bean on the right. Similar phase. Let's take way we go through apps here. It's really smooth, as you can see on both. I can't see a real issue here. As you can see, both OSs run very fluently. So let's take a look at the apps for folders. So folders is pretty much the same. There's really not a big difference. You just drag the apps onto each other and you make a folder. There's not really a big negative or anything like that on it. So they both run the same. If we look at the thickness of the form factors on both of them, you can see that the iPad Mini is obviously thinner by about a hair or so. But as I said, this form factor is up to you really to determine on what you want to have as a device. Size itself doesn't really matter on this specific device because they both perform very well in terms of portability. As you can see here, performance-wise, it is quite the same. But let's check out the browsers. So the Chrome browser on the right, let's take a zoom test. Now I don't know if you can see this, but there is a little bit of lag with the Chrome browser. It is really unnoticeable, but if you really look hard enough, you'll see that there is slightly a bit of lag in the Chrome browser. Now that might just be the Chrome browser being the issue, but the one thing is that the fluency of frames per second on the iPad never seems to lag in terms of web pages. The way the web page happens, let's have a look at the rotation obviously and see how quickly it does it. So there's the Nexus 7. Yeah, and see how smooth that rotated that web page in comparison to the Chrome browser. So you can see there is a slight difference there in the way you have frames per second. Obviously the iPad has the advantage over that, but as I said, it's really, really hard to notice unless you're looking at it side by side. Now let's take a look at the back. So the iPad Mini and the Nexus. So the Nexus has like a leathery feel to it, whereas the iPad has a obviously aluminium metal back. So the difference in quality is phenomenal. As you can see, the iPad is obviously built a little bit better in terms of quality on the back there. And when you look at the Nexus 7, you're not really getting the best quality, and I've had people tell me that, well, friends of mine have returned the Nexus 7 because it just pretty much fell apart. So yeah, so unless they were really unlucky, I haven't heard of that actually happening with an iPad ever. So let's take a look again back at the OS and take a look at the browsers. So there's the cameras at the top here. So both have their front-facing camera. I believe they're similar in a lot of ways. Obviously you have the gestures on the iPad which you can navigate with, and Android has the software buttons. And after 2 rounds, the Nexus 7 still holds its position as I give both tablets a 5, giving a grand total of a 9 for the iPad Mini and 10 for the Nexus 7. Multimedia. So let's take a look at both OSs. Obviously they're different in many ways. So the first thing we're going to look at here is magazines. So both look at different apps, very different apps. One uses Newsstand, the other uses Play magazines. So first thing we're going to do is look at Play magazines. So this is fairly new to Google, so this is what you get if you want to buy magazines through the Google Play Store. You have to use Play magazines. Whereas with iOS you use Newsstand to look at all your magazines. Right, so if we look at Play Store, the Google Play magazines, this is all your magazines. You can swipe through them, you can look at all your subscriptions like as if they're on a coffee table. On iPad, you look at the Newsstand like it's all on a shelf, and you go straight into it and tap on the latest issue. So as you can see here, it gives you every single issue that you have rather than give you the latest issue. So if we open up both on the iPad and the Nexus 7, and you see the iPad the iPad Mini definitely looks a lot better for magazines. It's literally made for magazines. The whole screen is full of your content. You don't have to zoom in, whereas on Google Play it doesn't really look that good. It doesn't really look that good for magazines. It's a little bit small. It's not exactly the best experience in the world. Whereas on the iPad Mini, nearly every single magazine is interactive. So you can go to any part of it and obviously interact with by tapping on little sections that you want to know about, drill down into anything you like. There's also movies in there and many things like that. Whereas with the Google Play magazines, it's pretty much a lot of the magazines are not interactive. There are some interactive ones, but majority of them are not. They are literally just scanned images. You can see there's more interactivity when you look at a magazine on an iPad. This is not just for the iPad Mini, but here are all your subscriptions. So there's all my subscriptions for Wired Magazine. As you can see, I can get to all that. That's pretty much magazines. So let's close all that off. Right, so this is another example of a magazine there. Right, so we're finished with magazines. Let's have a look at books. Right, so you'll notice with this that you have to get all your books basically from the Google Play Store. So there's a book section obviously in the Google Play Store that you tap on and you buy your books from there. As you can see, they're all laid out there for you, so you can see everything that you need, featured, categories, and so on. And then you go back, and then they obviously download in that. But with iBooks, you basically look at your shelf full of books and you hit the store button, which has its own little store for you to look at right from the convenience of the actual app itself. So you don't have to go into the App Store, and you don't have to do any of that crap because it's all integrated into iBooks itself. And see, there's all your books, and there's everything you need to know. So the differences here is that you have to go into Google Play to search for those books, whereas with iBooks, it's all there in the same app. So, differences is that you have Google Play on both the iPad and the Nexus 7. Playbooks. So if you really want to use Playbooks, it's there as well. So you have the best of both worlds. So if you go from Android to iOS, it's the easiest thing you ever do. Now let's look at the two books here. So this is one from obviously Android's point of view, and the other from the iOS point of view. This is Steve Jobs' biography. And you can see the iPad is made for book content, whereas the Nexus 7 with a slightly higher resolution, even though the text is a little bit crisper, it still doesn't look as good on the Nexus 7 than it does on the iPad. It's made for books on the iPad, regardless of its PPI resolution. It still looks a lot better in contrast, and still looks a lot better to read on the iPad mini. Content-wise, I still reckon even though you'd have the lowered PPI rate, you're still looking better on the iPad mini for reading. For holding stuff and all that sort of stuff, yeah, I guess the Nexus 7 is probably your best form factor, but just look at the color detail. Even in the photos there, you can see that the color just pops on the iPad mini. In those books, maybe it's iBookstore is optimized completely for the iPad and the Play Bookstore is not really, but you'll pretty much see the difference, and you'll find it very difficult to see the difference in terms of that. So yeah, I've just opened the Play Bookstore. As you can see, there's the Play Bookstore on both the iPad mini and obviously the Nexus 7. So yeah, this is really, really different. Obviously, you can see there's a carousel and the settings are different. And obviously, with the iPad mini version, it's not the same. But as you can see, the books open all up, and the books still look a lot better on the iPad mini than they do, obviously, on the Nexus 7. As you can see, the text is more narrow. It's a smaller font. It's not exactly probably the best reading experience, but both are readable. It's up to your own opinion, obviously. You've got to see this in real life before you can do it. Alright, let's take a look at the app stores here. So you can see a real difference in the app stores here. You're looking at pretty much the Google Play versus the App Store. The App Store's been around a lot longer than the Google Play Store, and you'll see very, very big jumps when you look at application organization. Google Play versus App Store. Very, very hard to determine. The App Store is pretty much the king of organizational apps in terms of how you view apps and how you organize them. Whereas with Google Play, it's getting there. It has got a lot better since then. So searching for apps. So let's search for Need for Speed, Most Wanted. Now that's a fairly popular game, so let's try and find that. So I'm just doing a proper search on the iPad mini, and I'm going to do that now on the Google Play Store. So I'm going to search for the same thing, and now let's look. Bam, I found it on the iPad mini straight away. And if we look at the Google Play, it didn't find it. So I don't know what's going on there. So the search pattern isn't exactly the best. It's definitely there. You can actually search for it. It's just really difficult to search for any type of application in the Google Play Store. Even when you directly search for it, it appears that I couldn't even find Need for Speed Most Wanted, whereas I found it straight away on the App Store on the Mac Mini. Now I'm just going to hunt for it. There it is. There it's on the front page. Found it. There it is, finally. So you can find apps if you know how to do it, but even using the search pattern is really difficult to obviously find. Now I'm trying a smaller search to see if I can find it, and I still can't find it, even though I tried putting the full name in, as you can see at the top there, and I still don't get it in the search pattern, which is quite funny, because, yeah, anyway, I don't know how to explain that. But that's the differences you can see in the quality of the App Store between the Google Play Store and obviously the iOS App Store. So, let's look at both Need for Speed. Oh yes, the other thing is that you can, organization again, look at the top there, iPad apps, iPhone apps. It's organized for you. So you know which are the tablet apps and you know which are the iPhone apps. Whereas on Google Play, you don't know what a tablet app is and you don't know what a phone app is. It basically, you have to guess, or you have to install it to the point that you find out then that it is an app for a tablet or an app for a phone. Now it's alright if you're on a phone because it won't matter. Android is beautifully done for a phone, but it's not done for a tablet. Doesn't matter if you have a 7-inch, it doesn't matter if you have a 10-inch tablet. It doesn't matter. It's just the hardest thing to find any type of tablet applications. There's no organization in there at all. But, and you see, let's look at the layout here. You can see you've got your ratings there. It's got organized a little bit differently to how it's organized on Google Play. So there's all the screenshots you can see there. You can see the same thing with Google Play. You got reviews, obviously categorized down the bottom there. It's all in one page. Right. So that is the App Store. So let's try a different thing also. Right. Let's try games. Obviously we're doing this with Riptide. And we're looking at the performance here. Now you can see that obviously with the Tegra processor with the Nexus 7, you'll see that there is a lot of things like effects and obviously anything like that. So you get the water splash effects on the Nexus 7 where you don't have that on the iPad mini. But you do have stuff like blur effects and all that sort of stuff on the iPad mini as well. But graphics wise you don't have the same quality. Riptide was made for Tegra 3. It wasn't made for iOS, which is pretty much the first type of game that out there that actually was there to demonstrate the type of performance you get from Tegra 3. Anyway, that's Riptide. As you can see, you see the quality, and that's how it is with games. Alright, let's take a look at music services. So we've got Google Music versus iTunes. In the cloud, iCloud and iTunes match. So with Google Music, we have a free service where you upload all your songs and you pretty much have your entire library in the cloud with Google Play, with Google Music. And then you can buy optional songs and all that sort of stuff. But here is the app itself. You can download, basically what I've done is I've downloaded the apps from Google Music or from all my entire music collection there. It's accessible and streamable from this app. As you can see with the iPad mini, you have iTunes Match, whereas you can download those and also stream them, or you can download them offline as well. Obviously, the difference is that you have to pay for iTunes Match, and that's about $34 per year, whereas with Google Play, it is free. The only difference is that with iTunes Match, it takes about 20 minutes to scan through your entire library and match all your songs with what is available in the iTunes Store. And with Google Play, you pretty much have to upload everything, and that takes days. So let's look at the players here. So you can see there I'm playing some Green Day there. It looks pretty good. The play controls are nothing to get excited about. They're all the same. It doesn't seem to be a big deal. The way you look at playlists is a different story. Obviously, it's displayed a little bit differently on the iPad with the iPad Music. It's a lot like the iPod. Basically, it's a lot like iTunes. And services, that is Google Music. So after 3 rounds, we can see that the iPad Mini has just got through this round with a 5, and the Nexus 7 gets a 3.5. So after 3 rounds, the iPad has taken the lead by half a point with 14 and Nexus 7 13.5. Alright guys, let's do a Geekbench score test between the Nexus 7 and of course the iPad Mini. So both of them are 16 gig and they're both Wi-Fi. So let's take a look at the Geekbench speed test. Before I go on, I'm just going to show you guys that I have no apps open on the Nexus and I've got no apps open on the Mini. So let's go into Geekbench. Okay, so as you can see, we've got the Asus Nexus 7. It's running Android 4.1.2. It's running an NVIDIA Tegra 3 1.3 GHz processor as well as 974 megabytes of RAM. Then we have the Geekbench for the iPad Mini, which is running iOS 6.0.1, running at 999 megahertz, so about 1 gigahertz, as well as 503 megabytes of RAM. So let's run benchmarks. Right, so we've got the iPad Mini running at 760 score, and we've got the Nexus 7 running at 1,395. So the iPhone 5 actually runs at 1,600, so that's actually quite good. Graphical performance. So I've got Geekbench 2.5.1 running on the Nexus 7 as well as the iPad Mini. So let's run a few tests here. Let's go performance tests, and I'll run all tests and see how we go. Okay, it's done. So, looks like we're just having a look at the Nexus 7 here, and we're looking at the iPad Mini. So let's have a look at the GL rates at the bottom here. So we'll look at the Egypt test, because that's the easiest thing. It does it based on frames per second. So we're looking at, we'll look at the very last bit here, which is the GL benchmark 2.1 Egypt Classic thing. It looks like the iPad Mini was getting 49 frames per second, whereas the Nexus was getting 32 frames per second off-screen. That's the off-screen test. On-screen, for the Egypt test, we're looking at 55 frames per second for the Nexus 7, and 59 frames per second for the iPad Mini. The fixed time step off-screen, we're looking at 8.2 frames per second for the Nexus 7, and we're looking at 12 frames per second. So frames per second on this specific test seems to be a lot higher in some places. Maybe the GPUs are a little bit different in context when it comes to OpenGL. But as far as we can tell from this GL benchmark, it looks like the iPad Mini takes the cake on graphics, which is quite strange, since a lot of them seem to boast a lot about the performance on Tegra 3, being a 12-core processor versus a dual-core processor. Anyway, but obviously the iPad Mini is catered towards OpenGL more so than the Tegra 3, according to this test. But there's no other graphical test I can use that's universal to both Android and iOS anyway, so this is the only one that I can use anyway. But there you have it. So even though the Nexus 7 did take it in GL in Geekbench, sorry, there it didn't actually take it in GL benchmark. So there we go, there's the GL test. Cheers. Although the iPad Mini took it last round, the Nexus 7 just made it over the top here with a 3.5 for the iPad Mini and a 4.3 for the Nexus 7. They take the lead at 17.8 for the Nexus 7 and 17.5 for the iPad Mini. Okay, the next thing we're going to look at here is obviously the Webpage performance. So there's no universal app for Safari, so I'm actually going to open up Chrome on both the Nexus 7 and of course the iPad Mini. So I'm going to open up the Verge at the same time, hopefully. Okay, and the iPad Mini is done, and the Nexus 7 just comes in there, right there. So there we go, there's the Verge, right there. So this is it right there. So both using Chrome browsers, and the iPad Mini pretty much took the cake on loading the Verge. This is the first time I've ever run this specific site. So there we go. So if we go now into articles, so let's do the zoom test. So look at that. Yeah, they're pretty much the same. Looks to me anyway. Okay, both using Chrome, and they run the same, so Chrome must process in the same sort of way. Alright, so now I'm going to look at Safari and load up the exact same thing. Okay, so if we go to the Verge here, you can see Safari is running a lot faster than Chrome. In terms of, even in zoom, it's a lot faster. So Chrome runs exactly the same on iOS as it does on the Nexus. So it doesn't matter what platform you have Chrome on, it still runs the same. The great thing is that you can see that Safari's obviously been optimized to take advantage of this specific device, whereas Chrome's technically on natively for this device on the Nexus, but you're not getting exactly the same frames per second in zooming. But nonetheless, they both run relatively good. The iPad just has the edge in frames per second. So there, that's browsers. So after 5 rounds, the final verdict is in. After 5 rounds, we can see that the iPad and the Nexus are in. And the iPad takes it out with a 5 for this round, and overall we see the scores that the iPad Mini just takes it out by 22.5 and the Nexus 7 with a 21.8. And in a battle where the Nexus 7 made it in front, the iPad Mini came up right beside it and won this specific 5-round battle between the iPad Mini and the Nexus 7. Now, this review is based on complete and utter overviews of everything from Apple and Google services to features and usability. You guys can make the decision for yourselves. Both of them are very good tablets, and it's up to you to make that decision. So guys, I'll catch you later for the next review, and I'll see you guys later. Cheers.